Hello and welcome to this live stream. I'm not sure if anyone's in here yet, but Newcastle United have just beaten Wolverhampton Wanderers 2-1 at Molineux. We're here to react instantly to the game. I'll wait for a few people to drop in to chat, but also if you are in the chat, do drop some stuff in. Let's start talking about it. I didn't think it was I don't think it was a great performance by Newcastle again. Another poor performance overall, really, from the start of the season. It's yet another poor performance. Sorry, and yet Newcastle United find themselves in the top four, and Newcastle United are third in the league and looking like they are in a position to assault the top four at the moment with their results. Their performances aren't great, as we know, but they keep winning games and they keep finding their way through. And logic says that can't carry on. We know that, but Newcastle United are still sitting third. There was coming back from behind is not something Newcastle have tended to do as well. So I'm just waiting for some people to enter the live to put some stuff in the chat. But please do, once you are here, drop some stuff in the live chat. Newcastle United 2-1 winners at Molineux today after Mario Lemina put Wolves ahead at half time, and then Fabian Schär and Harvey Barnes both scored 2 goals in the second half. 2 absolute screamers, it must be said as well, to pull Newcastle back into the game. And Newcastle are in a position now to look back and think this has been, obviously, it is the best start to a season since 1995-96, I believe. Obviously, we know how positive a season overall that was for Newcastle. We know how it ended, but generally it's one of Newcastle's greatest ever seasons. They're nowhere near on the performance level of that at the moment, obviously, but it has been a very, very good start for Newcastle to attack this season. I think Newcastle will be in a position to really sort of go for to build from this after such a difficult performance. Games of performances. I thought they started the game really well today, and then let it slip, and then they weren't in a position where they were able to claw it back until late in the second half when Schär sort of comes up with a goal from nowhere, and then the pressure started to build, and Barnes struck, and Newcastle levelled, and Newcastle went ahead, and they looked dangerous at that point, and I think they started and ended the game well, but that middle part was a bit of a worry. Again, still waiting for people to join the live and put some stuff in the comments as well. But yeah, please do get involved if you are able to. But I think Newcastle. It's been a great start to the season. Obviously, there's the backdrop of all the negativity. There's the backdrop of all the issues and building from there. But which we talked about in previous lives and previous videos. We're a bit fed up with talking about Paul Mitchell and Eddie Howe. It's great to be winning games on the pitch, to at least be able to put that back. But I think eventually there has to be a situation where Newcastle do start to win games and start to think that they have to start, sorry, not winning games, they have to start performing well, and that's got to come from this, because eventually, I said on a previous video, these results don't tend to last when the performances aren't there, but it shows great mettle, and it shows a very good side that Newcastle were able to win this game. So if you're in the chat, drop some comments in and let's get going. But yeah, I think Newcastle didn't deserve much from the middle part of that game. Again, Wolves, their plan worked for most of the game, particularly in the first. After the first 20 minutes, they went into half-time fully deserving of their lead. There was the commentator said on Sky that Wolves weathered Newcastle's second half storm. I'm not convinced there was a storm, really, for the first sort of 5-10 minutes of sustained possession. Bruno Guimaraes had a shot from distance. Then Wolves regained control again, and it looked like Newcastle were in trouble from there. But they're in a position now where they can build, and I think there's Fulham next week at Craven Cottage. Then there's Wimbledon in the Cup, and then there is Manchester City at home before the next international break. There's a real opportunity, as I say. It's the best start on the pitch since 1995. Obviously, it was the best start pre for 13 years before this game. Drop some comments in the live. I can see a few people are joining now. Do drop some comments in the chat. Let's get going. I've just been rambling to myself for about 5 minutes, but again, I understand. These games, it's difficult to know when to set the live up. Do you set the live up before the game? I tend to do it after the game when I know the result, and I can put a thumbnail together. So it's a bit hastily put together. Ian says, "Yeah." It's so strange, isn't it? I think generally where Newcastle find themselves now compared to previously. I can think of last season was probably more positive. The team was probably in a better position this time last year when they had a really difficult start. They lost those 3 games to Brighton, Man City, and Liverpool. They were on the floor going into September, and now suddenly they're flying. They're third in the league, behind only Arsenal and Manchester City, and they look like they can grind out results against these sort of mid-table teams. And what was worrying for me at parts of this game, it's obviously not so much of a worry now because they won the game, but that Wolves had come in with such a lack of confidence. But there was a sense that they knew what they were going to do to beat Newcastle in midfield. We don't want to dwell too much on this, but I thought the midfield battle was lost at parts. Again, when more people join the chat, please do continue to put some stuff in the chat. But we'll get into sort of the team selection and thinking about that. For me, it was disappointing not to see Sandro Tonali start. I understand Eddie Howe is a huge Sean Longstaff fan, and I understand Eddie Howe is somebody who doesn't like to throw players in when they are not quite ready for it. But I thought Tonali was ready. I think he's played against Spurs. He played against Forest for Newcastle. Then he played, I think, 2 games for Italy. Certainly was man of the match against France, and that astonishing assist that we spoke about on the last video for DeMarco's goal at the Parc des Princes. I thought he earned a start, and I was disappointed to see that he didn't start because I think him not starting meant that Newcastle were lacking in a player who could move the ball forward and get the team playing in the way Wolves had set up to sort of counter Newcastle and set traps in the midfield, much the way that Newcastle actually set up against Wolves back in March when they won 3-0 in James's Park. They sat deep and they set traps and they won the ball high and then they broke. And every single time they broke, there seemed to be acres of space for them to hit. When a team's going to do that, you need a player or a midfield generally to move the ball fast, to be good and solid in possession, and energetic to get around the pitch, which describes Sandro Tonali as a footballer. So for me, it was disappointing to see that he didn't start the game, and it felt like at half-time Eddie Howe had realised the error of his ways and made a bit of a change to the way he set up in the second half. So see, Joe Willock coming back was fantastic news. We were all a bit scared to know what the diagnosis of his thigh injury was. It's great to see it was only 10 days or so until he returned. And yeah, it felt like Eddie Howe sort of realised the error of his ways. Isak coming off with a nose injury. Hopefully that isn't going to be too serious. But the fact that he had to come off showed it was too much for him to start to play. But Newcastle did look worryingly like they lacked potency without Isak. We know that's never Gordon down the middle doesn't tend to work, and ultimately they've relied on two bits of magic to win them the game, and that's fine to talk about today. Absolutely brilliant to the comments coming into the chat. As great as it is, we can celebrate the victory, but ultimately Newcastle need to start finding their performances properly and get together good displays. And they've been blessed a little bit with a decent start to the season in terms of the fixtures, but if they play anything like this against Manchester City, then they're going to get torn apart, and they need to find their feet. So the bigger picture of today ultimately is one that it was the very same against Tottenham. It was the very same against Southampton. When he sat here against Southampton, though, there was a lot of excuses in a way, not excuses, but there was a reason why, there was a mitigating circumstance why they had to play that way, because Fabian Schär was sent off in the first half. Newcastle have had 11 men in every game since, and they haven't looked like they're capable of winning the games yet and finding their feet properly in full games. They started really well today. It looked like they had their midfield set. They were winning the ball high. They were finding Anthony Gordon, finding Alexander Isak. They were getting through, and Wolves were on the back foot for the first 20 minutes. Then their traps set in, and ultimately it was disappointing from there. I do appreciate that Newcastle have won the game. I'm just rambling. Put some things in the chat, and we can bounce off each other. But I think Newcastle should be, are very lucky to be where they are in the league table, considering the performance levels. And ultimately, I do think that at some stage in the near future, that's got to change, because the results don't tend to last, especially when you're chasing at the top of the league for European places. But it's a great way to offset the negativity that's sort of engulfed the club off the pitch over the last few weeks, isn't it? And there was no real negative in terms of, Bruno coming through the game after his excursions in South America, Tonali coming back in and looking solid, and I don't think he had much time to do much. Form is temporary, class is permanent, says Ian. I tend to agree. I think that's why Newcastle are able to do this, because they've got the quality, and the you can rely on the team, you think, to find their form in terms of performances and eventually. But it is interesting, isn't it, that there's quite a bit of pressure to find that form, I think, ultimately. If you please, if you haven't already, I know there's quite a small amount of people in the live, because I need to get better at advertising these things, but please do hit a like if you haven't already and you're watching this stream, and also share it as well. Try and get other people to watch, just to boost it. I do need to, as I say, improve I do need to improve the way I advertise these streams, for sure. Liam says it feels like the media stuff with Eddie Howe and Mitchell is felt on the pitch, even though they're picking up points. I think the thing about that is, even if it isn't the case, it's easy to make that suggestion. It's easy to think about that. That's why I think they need a cleansing performance, and the results are great. I mean, absolutely, what Ian says is true. The results are absolutely fantastic. So ultimately, that's what matters. But it does feel like there needs to be something else to sort of calm everyone down, because it does feel like there's something isn't right. Eddie Howe's comments in his press conference. If you haven't checked out my thoughts on that, by the way, please go and do that. In the pre-video, and I think, it feels like a lot like Newcastle are sort of. If you remember the Steve Bruce, it's completely different, obviously, but if you remember under Steve Bruce a few years ago, in Steve Bruce's first season, where Newcastle kept hobbling through games, defenders were scoring goals, and they were, winning the odd game by the odd goal, and just finding that, just doing enough. And it feels a little bit like that. But the difference is the pressure is very much on to deliver performances, because ultimately, eventually, when you're at the top of the table, you can't coast through too many games, because teams like, Villa, look at what Villa did yesterday, 2-0 down. I don't think Newcastle have that in them at this point in time. That's the difference. 2-0 down to Everton yesterday, they came back and won. Tottenham are a bit poor. Manchester United got maybe a bit lucky yesterday, but they're still picking up points as well. You've got Liverpool are going to be up there as well all season. So there's obviously, again, they lost. So this weekend has shown that there's unpredictability. So the fact that Newcastle can win these games is great, but there needs to be something coming in. as well. I think, I do think that Newcastle will, by the way, will pick up their points. But keep putting some stuff in the chat. Let's get talking about where did you think it went right in the end, but what were your feelings about the team selection? Let's talk about the team selection. As I said earlier, I thought that Sandro Tonali should have started. Probably disappointed to see Harvey Barnes on the bench as well, given that he'd scored against Spurs and then spent the last he spent the last 2 weeks with Eddie Howe while others were on international duty. Still started on the bench behind Jacob Murphy. That was a bit puzzling to me. I think he's proved his point. I wonder if he'll start. I would expect him to start as well against Fulham next week. But I thought the team selection was there was enough in the team to win the game. I don't look at that as much as disappointed as it was to see Tonali not start. I didn't look at Sean Longstaff and think he couldn't do what was expected of him in that midfield, which was pass the ball fast and get around the pitch enough. That's what he should be able to do. So it was disappointing to see in terms of the performance. I think it was it wasn't the personnel that was the issue. It was generally the application. But I did sort of have some misgivings about the starting 11. Let me know what you think as well. Sorry, I didn't have too many misgivings with the starting 11. I thought it was enough. Once Tonali wasn't there, it was a shame, but I think eventually Tonali will come into the team and will start more games and will eventually find his feet. So I don't have too many fears about that. But yeah, I think Newcastle are in a position to go forward, but it was a difficult game. Let me know, as I say, what you think about the starting 11. Jay says, "Evening, Harry. What a finish to the game. Still haven't got second gear, but best start in decades. This season is weird. I think that is the thing. This season is really weird. If you think about Tottenham having such a difficult start, and lots of people sort of calling for Ange Postecoglou to go. It seems like after their derby defeat, Liverpool sort of looking unbelievably very good unbelievable for the first couple of weeks. Suddenly they just come unstuck yesterday completely against Forest, who've had a great start by them, as well. We can't really ignore that. Ian says Tonali's essentially been injured for a year. It makes sense to phase him. Yeah, I understand that. I do get that. But going back to Jay's point about it being a weird season, it has been odd in terms of how everything's sort of gone from this season. Like if you look at the lack of transfer activity, there's not been so many. There's not been so much. I would argue there's not been so much momentum for most teams. So the fact that Newcastle are picking up these wins when there's no momentum, it certainly bodes well. Nathan says, going forward, Barnes has to start more games, but can we really expect Gordon to play on the right for the foreseeable? Tricky one. No, I think this is kind of the issue, isn't it? I think it's an age-old problem. I don't know what as great as Barnes has been when he's played, and recently, obviously, 2 goals in 2 games, and his impact is obvious. It does sort of strike you as strange, doesn't it, that they bought him for 40 million on top of Gordon. Perhaps at the time, Gordon hadn't started particularly well, so there was covering that. But then they've left the right-hand side untouched, effectively. If you'd spent that 40 million on a right winger, then the team would look a lot more balanced, and there wouldn't be this issue. I think eventually that's what I wonder will happen, whether Barnes plays on the right or Gordon plays on the left, or Gordon plays on the right. So that will be the pairing eventually, I would imagine. So I think, definitely need a right winger signing in January. The thing is that they've needed a right wing signing since the takeover. Like the fact that Miguel Almiron and Jacob Murphy are the 2 right wingers says quite a lot, really, about where Newcastle have been. So it feels a little bit like this is another example of that of those shortcomings. I think even though there's a victory today, you can look at the first goal, which was poor in possession, slow to react, no recovery pace in defence, obvious issue, and then obviously Barnes and Gordon, the good things, everything good coming from the left. You think why couldn't there be that balance of a right winger and a left winger, and it still doesn't add up to me as much as I think Barnes is a great player at what he does, as Jason said, what he does well, he does very well. It doesn't add up to me now thinking back when they've had all these PSR issues and spending money in the way that they have, and not being able to spend as much as they would like. It feels odd to me that they sanction two expensive left wing upgrades when they haven't sanctioned one right wing upgrade. But yeah, but as Ian says, what a goal! It was phenomenal, wasn't it? So, thoughts on Trippier? Yes, Trippier. I think for me, Trippier should start the next game because it's telling. I don't know why there needs to be this change for Livramento. As much as I rate Livramento in the last two away games, Bournemouth and now today, and you'll have to correct me because as I say, I was in Paris for the Spurs game, so I wasn't aware of that game. But Trippier has come on for Livramento in those games, and the team has instantly improved. I don't know whether that's much to do with Livramento himself, but Trippier calms everybody, and is still, for me, I think he should start the game because the fact that that Howe wants to has changed the situation suggests to me that he isn't quite sure, and I think it's time I would start Trippier in the next game at Fulham. I think Kelly for me would be a better option to start at left back as well. There's too many times I think again today that Hall was caught out on the left. Everything that Wolves did in the second half when they were threatening Kane down that left-hand side. So yeah, it was a difficult one. I think feels like forced Tino because he cost 40 million. I think that there was a sense that in the summer that there was a changing of the guard, and perhaps it's not quite that set in stone. It feels like Trippier. It's great that Trippier is still here because I think if he wasn't, then Newcastle would be a lot weaker than they are. If you haven't already, please do drop a like on the stream, and we'll again keep your thoughts coming in as well. Ian says it's horses for courses. We have options. Let's use them. Tend to agree. I don't know on Isak, by the way. Nathan's just said in the chat. Is it broken nose? It feels like it was more. It might be something like that because it's quite serious, which you would imagine with the things like masks and the protection that people can have. He'll play against Fulham, or he might play against, or I think he'd probably sit out Wimbledon anyway. Let's be honest. So he'll either play against Fulham. If not, then he'll play against Man City. There won't be too many issues with that. But I think Newcastle it showed the issues that they have without him. The fact that Newcastle looked a lot less potent up front, and that would have been just for the sort of. I understand the whole thing of getting ultimately Eddie Howe's been proven correct because he brought on Barnes, Willock, and Tonali, and then obviously Trippier as well. So there was he got senior players onto the pitch, and that was, by the way, that was a great thing about today was the amount of quality that there was on the pitch. On the bench, it was a really, really good squad of players. There was so many options, but I thought Newcastle lacked something for not having that physical presence. I would be interested to see Will Asula come on today for Isak, just to sort of keep the continuity with the focal point. And I think Newcastle, as much as Gordon can technically play at left back, as much as he can technically play up front, I think Newcastle lacks something when he does, and shows, as Jay said, shows Asula mustn't have gained the trust. Yeah, I mean, we've seen it's not a surprise, is it? I mean, we know how Eddie Howe works now, don't we? We know that he he tends to do this. He tends to take time, and you have to prove yourself, especially when you're a young player. It took ages for Lewis Hall to get there, and lots of people were wondering why. But I just thought Newcastle lacked something. And yeah, as Ian said, that they always have to wait their turn. But I thought Newcastle lacked something when Isak went off, and that Asula could have surely. I mean, that's the way in the Cellar Cup he looked lively, and I've seen him myself for Sheffield United. He's got a physical presence. He's got a good touch. He can turn a player. I would have probably put him. And again, I can't. Newcastle have won the game probably because of the substitution. So Eddie Howe's been proven correct in that sense. But I just think going forward, if Isak is out and there's no Wilson, I would absolutely start Asula before I start Gordon down the middle. Will it look good? Hope he can stay fit, massive player. Joe Linton hasn't started the best of the season. Joe Linton had a weird game, didn't he? Because I thought Joe Linton started really well. There was a point when the sort of turn of after that sort of 15, 20 minutes when Newcastle were dominant, there was a point where they turned a little bit because Wolves started to set the traps. Andre and João Gomez in the middle were really good. And they started to get a bit more joy. And Bruno was dispossessed. And I thought Bruno was disappointing today, by the way. But Bruno was dispossessed and Joe Linton wins the ball straight away. And it was great. And you think they can build from this. And then suddenly he started to lose the ball a little bit. And yeah, he came off at half-time, I think. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he came off at half-time. And it looked like he hasn't had the best of starts, despite being, we thought Newcastle were in this great place after the Cellar Cup with those, particularly that Girona performance. Everyone was firing and ready to go, and it just hasn't started in that vein quite yet. Nathan says Bruno and Hall travelled and played international, both cramping up. Yeah, it's a good point. Bruno, you've got to give him that sort of leeway, especially at the age that Hall is. The fact that he won't be used to 290 minutes or too long to two starts in a week. That's another very fair point as well. But yeah, it felt like a decent. It's a great result. It felt like a decent performance up until that first 20 minutes. Then there's a lot of these, as I said earlier, a lot of these worrying things that are continuing to happen, and eventually Newcastle, if they don't improve, will get caught out. I think that's just ultimately the way it'll happen. So I think that we'll see how it goes, but I think that if they play like that against Fulham and against Man City, eventually that they're going to come unstuck. And I would, as I say, in the next game, if there's not a possibility that Isak plays against Fulham, I would absolutely start Asula rather than playing Gordon down the middle. Let me know in the comments if you agree with that thought. Ian says, on another topic, Wolves could be in trouble. I think Wolves are one of those teams that happens quite often where these teams that come up, and if you remember when they came up in 2018, they had a lot of financial backing. They had the Portuguese connections with Jorge Mendes. They had Ruben Neves. They had Jota. They had a couple of other really good players. And gradually, those players, obviously, Jota was the first to go, wasn't really replaced with a similar quality player. Neves went, and I actually really like their midfield. I like the João Gomez and Andre. I think Andre's a really, really good player, highly rated, and was a lot of teams wanted him across Europe. So I was quite surprised that Wolves got in there, but losing Neto again and not really replacing them, they didn't have a lot of pace going forward. So I agree. I think Wolves they'll be lucky that again it feels a little bit like Ipswich and Southampton particularly are gonna struggle in the way that maybe Burnley and Sheffield United did last season, but it doesn't feel like they're in a position, Wolves, where they can really build for anything. And a better team probably punishes Newcastle where Wolves didn't today, I think. So I do understand exactly what Ian's saying with that comment. Any more thoughts? Do you thinking about where Newcastle go? I mean, what changes would you make for Fulham off the back of that? Barnes got a start, surely. Willock has he proven his fitness? If everyone's fit in midfield, what's your midfield three as well? Because that's interesting. Because lots of talk today about Tonali and Longstaff. Obviously, Bruno was guaranteed to start as captain. Joe Linton's been a bona fide starter. But if Willock and Tonali are both fit coming in alongside the other three with Longstaff, Joe Linton, and Bruno, where do you go from there? What's your midfield three? And is Joe Linton's position under threat after such a sort of difficult start to the season? Burn was a beast today, deserved credit. People are quick to give him stick. I think generally, yeah, I think that's a very fair point. He seems to have done well to quash throughout a difficult start to the season. Generally, he seems to have done well to quash the sense of anger about him in the way that maybe Longstaff hasn't. Ian says, I reckon Tonali starts Fulham. I see it in stars. Yeah, I think there's got to be a point, hasn't there, where Tonali comes in, because as was rightly pointed out, he hasn't been around for a year, so it doesn't feel like it felt like it was obvious that maybe he wasn't going to have this sort of quick start, come in as quickly as maybe the fans wanted him to. But given that he came into to change Newcastle's fortunes in midfield last summer, and there were sort of signs of it happening before the ban came in with his link up with Bruno was improving, when at the start of the season it was really difficult. And then obviously I've said in previous videos and things that the fact that he speaks great English now and he's settled off the pitch, everything's better in that regard. He's going to come in and be more ready than he ever has been in the Newcastle shirt. I think he's showing that in little glimpses, particularly against Forest, when I believe he got a lot of high praise for his performance in that game. So yeah, I think there's a sense of something with Tonali that's brewing, and once he strikes me as the kind of player that a bit like when Bruno came. If you remember, Bruno didn't get into the team for a long time, for a few games after he signed, and then you couldn't understand. You couldn't understand. You couldn't imagine a team without him, and I think eventually it'll be the same with Tonali. Jay says if Isak is out, Joe Linton could go back up top. We never really seen him up there since his rebirth. I think I said this to somebody the other day. I think nobody talks about Joe Linton in terms of being a striker, and he's never been prolific. Like even when he was at Hoffenheim, he was more of a sort of wide forward or deeper forward. A bit, there were comparisons with Roberto Firmino when he was there and things. So he was never going to be a 30-goal a season striker, but I think he could do a better job. Like he scored a couple of goals recently and across the last few seasons. His goal against Southampton, for example, that's a striker. That's a great striker's finish. And you're right. I think there's a really, really good point that it hasn't been said enough that he is in a position to maybe as an option to play up front. The one thing I just wouldn't do, because it takes him away from his preferred position without offering any focal point or anything really good, really worth it for me, is I wouldn't play Gordon up there if I could help it. And obviously, I think there's got to be a point where you've got to give Asula a go. I think Asula will start against Wimbledon, and we'll get a good look at him there probably. But the whole point of Asula coming in was to offer something different offer continuity. Sorry, maybe more of the same when Isak and Wilson were not there. So I think anything beyond that is a little bit of a risk. But with the midfield strength coming in, as I alluded to 5 minutes ago, maybe Jay's point is valid, because there's the midfield in terms of numbers is looking in good shape again. As I say, if you haven't already, please do give the live a thumbs up, and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I'd love some more subscribers. Trying to get to 1,000 across the course of this season as well. And as I've said in previous videos, the channel is now available for memberships. So I'm working on sort of structure of how I would want to do these and who would be interested. Obviously, the live is quite short on people today, I think, because I didn't really give anyone any warning that I was doing it in terms of like usually I come in and I give a warning of that I said that the live was happening. There was no link. Usually, if there's a link there, people can click through. And I think generally speaking, that's why this live's been a little bit drier. But going forward, I'm hopeful that there's going to be a lot of interest in the membership scheme. So please do let me know what you'd want out of that as well while you're here. If you'd be interested in that, and I'll make an announcement on that in the next week or two, I think. Jay's also come back and said Willock made a huge difference, arguably more impactful than Sandro today. Yeah, Willock is absolutely massive. I'm such an advocate of Joe Willock in pretty much everything that he does on a football pitch. I think this 2 seasons ago when Newcastle finished in the top 4, he was the player of the season. So many of the key moments of that season. You think of the Chelsea goal. You think of the Man United goal at St. James. That's my goal of the season, the Man United goal. Both of those two probably are my goals of that season. For sheer audacity, the finish with the outside of his boot against Chelsea. But I thought that his goal against Man U really typified Newcastle that season. And the reason, and obviously, I was such a vocal advocate of him missing and having such an impact, a negative impact on the team's fortunes last season as well, when he wasn't there, because the team just didn't look like it could function in the same way. Jay's also said that his loan run saved the club from relegation and allowed the takeover to happen. He deserves a statue. I think that might be going a little bit far, personally, but I think he's phenomenal. Genuinely, so underrated in so many ways, and not so much by the fan base. And I think I got into a little bit of trouble when I tweeted this the other week, that I said that he's underrated. I think the fan base rates him adequately, but the fact that he's never been in contention for England, even when he was in that great form 2 seasons ago, and he seems like the sort of archetypal modern English midfielder, so much energy, so much drive, dynamism, pace, everything you'd want to see, and he's got a goal in him as well, as we know, and he can pick a pass. Obviously, that great assist against Spurs. There's so many great moments that he deserves a lot more credit, in my opinion, for certainly externally than he gets. And going back to Jay's initial point, he made a huge difference today. It's great to see him fit again, and hopefully he can stay like that. Because if he can, Newcastle will be in a lot better, a much better place than they have been in when he's not there. It was that escape under Bruce that season was very much down to he really changed Newcastle's fortunes by himself that season under Bruce. The fact that he came in to really make that difference. I think Newcastle will be in a much better place next season this season if he can stay fit. So yeah, let's dive a little bit more into the game again. Let's look at the that first half performance. I thought, as I say, 20 minutes, it was great. Then there's that turn, and the fact that the annoying thing was you could see it coming a mile off, because the fact that Newcastle, you could see it coming a mile off, because Newcastle did that to Wolves, apart from anything else back in March, and then they did the same thing, but they weren't getting any joy with it in the first 20 minutes. Newcastle's passing was crisper, it was faster, it was forward, it was dominant. They really were strong in that midfield, and they were unlocking that. And as a result of that, Gordon had that chance before 0-0, and Isak was connecting well with Gordon, connecting well with the midfield. He dropped deep for that chance for Murphy as well. That front three was much more close to the midfield for the first 20 minutes. Then it suddenly went all pear-shaped, and Wolves took control. And I think a better team than Wolves absolutely probably runs away with that game at that point, because Newcastle just couldn't get a foothold before half time. Went 1-0 down, and in the past that's been a kiss of death for Newcastle, both at times under Eddie Howe, but previously and previous guys, is that they would absolutely not have come back from that. So to hold on, to regroup, and credit to Eddie Howe for being bold with his substitutions. 3 at half time didn't make an immediate impact, but then once it did, those players were at the forefront. I think that he deserves huge credit for that as well today. How long before Tonali starts over Longstaff? Much sharper passing yet. We've as we've said, I think I agree with that completely. And there's got to be a sense. There's got to be something. I think that with Tonali, where I wouldn't be surprised if he either starts Fulham or starts Wimbledon, and then starts Man City if he comes through either of those or both of those. Because he's just a class act. He's a level above Longstaff, or 2 levels above Longstaff in pretty much everything he does. He's more physically imposing. He's more intelligent with his passing. He's as energetic. He runs as much, but he's just a much better player generally. So I think going into that halftime break, as I was saying earlier, Newcastle were nowhere to be seen. Then, as I said, the commentator said something about Wolves weathering Newcastle's storm in the first. Ian says, I think Tonali starts Fulham, but wouldn't bet on it. I'm not going to answer that too much. So Newcastle started the second half a little bit better. They had possession. They had that shot from Bruno, but they weren't knocking the door down. And then the commentator says, as I mentioned, that he thought that Wolves weathered Newcastle, the storm from Newcastle. They didn't put a storm forward. There was, as I say, good possession. They didn't look like they were getting back into the game at all. But then it started to click a little bit. And I think it was in spite of that sort of lack of focal point up front. Because I think Gordon he works hard, but he isn't a striker. Like, as much as he has played there, he doesn't have the physicality and the imposing nature that Newcastle need in a striker. And that's why I would have probably put Asula up there if I had the choice. But again, there's absolutely no criticism of Eddie Howe for his substitutions. Barnes makes a difference. Obviously, Cher comes up, scores that goal. And again, though, there's no real sort of shift. I think it's a gradual shift. There's no in the same way that Wolves in that first half dominated from the sort of 20-minute mark, and there was a sort of mark in the sand where they started to win a couple of those, gained confidence, and then wrestled control of the game. Newcastle didn't do that really. They leveled, and then it was a gradual thing where Wolves retreated, they lost their confidence, and Newcastle gradually found themselves pushing forward. And then obviously nobody can mitigate for that ridiculous strike from Barnes to win it. And here we are talking about Newcastle sitting third in the league. It's a strange scenario that I didn't really see coming, if I'm honest. But we are where we are. Pope. Someone's mentioned Pope in the chat. Nick Pope. That save was just incredible at the end as well, and he looks nervous whenever he's got the ball at his feet. We know this. It's frustrating to see them carry on playing it to him, and there was a point in the first half where he almost gave it away. But generally speaking, Newcastle have had a great servant in him, and he showed again. You know what you're getting from Nick Pope. That's what they missed last season. I think nobody thought when he went out, when he did his shoulder, I think nobody immediately thought that Newcastle would be a disaster, because I think everyone thought that Dubravka could come in and replace him. He showed evidently that he couldn't, but there's nobody in that goalkeeping department that could get anywhere near what Pope is doing for Newcastle with the sort of consistency of his saves, the fact that he gets off his line so well. Yeah, Pope makes a huge difference to Newcastle as well, doesn't he? So I think I think Ian said earlier that Tonali. He says Tonali's going to start Fulham, but he wouldn't bet on it. I think Tonali will start either one of those games. I think it's time now where I agree that he's been out for a while, and obviously he needs to be phased back in. I get all that, but I think now's the time where it's sort of like do or don't start him and see where he gets with it. Jay says, the retro kit debut. Sorry, I'll get to Jay's question in a point. Someone else has said the retro retro kit's debut. It looked good, didn't it? I thought. I like the blue shorts. I wasn't sure what the shorts were going to be. I thought they were going to be white, and I'm a fan of hooped socks, so I thought that the hooped socks would be back. That there'll be hooped socks. I hadn't seen the full kit, but I thought it looked good. And yeah, Jay says people debate too much about Pope's distribution. His throwing is always accurate, and there isn't it isn't hard to recycle the ball for a free fullback, which is mostly what he's been asked to do. Yeah, again, that's fair, but it's just a couple of times where he does. You obviously look when he is asked to sort of do that. There's a split second where he's a bit unsure of himself, which he isn't in any other facet of his game, whether it's making ridiculous saves from close range, whether it's whether it's coming off his line, as I mentioned, whether it's commanding his area. Generally, he's much better. We don't really have a shearer up front to latch the long kicks onto anyway, says Ian. And certainly not when Isak goes off and there isn't any sort of focal point. Not that Isak is particularly good at winning the ball in the air, and that's not really a strong point, is it? But yeah, I think generally Newcastle have come into this game. I think needing the worrying thing for me, and let me know in the chat what you think about this. But the worrying thing for me is that Newcastle came into this game needing a performance, and they'd had 2 weeks. And again, context, the result is fine. But is anyone else a bit concerned about the performance levels, or do you think, as a lot of people do, that they'll just come because the results are there and eventually things will even themselves out? Or, as somebody mentioned earlier, do you think that maybe there is a fear that the off-field thing and the negativity for the last few weeks and not signing and the lack of momentum that we've spoken about is actually impacting the team and the togetherness and that? I don't have any information on that personally. I think it's probably a little bit too easy to say that. Ian says he's not concerned. Ellie says, I'd be more concerned as an Everton fan. Very, very fair point. And it's better to be, ultimately, it's better to be, and Newcastle have had this before where they've played well and not won the games. So surely it's better to be winning games than it is to be losing, playing well and losing games, I guess. But yeah, I thought Newcastle we're gonna come up with something today. Honestly, I came into it thinking that they were in a position where Isak had scored in international duty, as mentioned on my previous video. Hall had played fairly well. I think that the whole thing needs to wait a little bit again. I think Kelly should come in against Wolves, Fulham, by the way, after another example. I think he just doesn't look confident, and that's what concerns me a little bit. Valid criticism, says Ian, but not concerned. I think we've been canny lucky, says Jay. Long let it live, but we won't keep racking up the points being this disjointed. That's my fear. And as I said earlier, my thought process around the whole thing was that it's kind of the opposite or the same thing in a different context to Steve Bruce's first season, when there was that run of games where they kept getting, I remember being at Southampton and Federico Fernandez scored a header in the last 10 minutes and they won 2-1, and they just didn't deserve it at all, and that kept happening. And there was a win at West Ham where St Maximin inspired them, and there was a couple, Shelby scored, Fernandez scored again. They were getting these sort of goals from places where you didn't think it could last because Joe Linton wasn't scoring when he was up front, and it was a problem. It was a real problem for them. And eventually, it was fine. They got through it, but the event, then they went and immediately bought Wilson and fixed the striker issue, and things sort of started to improve in terms of how they could do things. It's kind of, they need something else. But the worrying thing is that they've got all the tools this time. They've got a midfield that's strong enough to dominate games. They've got a striker who can score 30 goals in a season, you would imagine. They've got a creative force in Gordon. They've got a goal-scoring winger in Barnes. And yet it doesn't look right. And you've got to, I think there is legitimate questions as to why that is. And I think that needs to change eventually because, like Jay says, it won't last without it. We also seem to be playing slightly differently. Might just be a bedding in, but less high press. That is a very, very valid point from Ian as well. There has been less energy about this team in the last few games since the start of the season, at a point where again, lots of people said last season that they had to change because of the number of games and the fact that they had so many injuries and all that sort of thing. But this wasn't what we expected. Have they really been the sort of consistently as high pressing and as energetic as they were 2 years ago? Since then, I think last season they deserved a lot of credit for being able to play two different ways. They knew that teams were going to come and sit back at St James's Park, and they were. I remember giving them a lot of credit on this channel after wins over Burnley and Brentford at the start of the season, where they didn't play well, but controlled the game and go over the line. Doesn't feel like they're controlling games anymore, even though it feels like they're sort of just relying on something. They're just relying on Isak's brilliance or one little bit of magic from Barnes today, or a breakaway, and the team does connect for once or twice in the game. It doesn't even feel like they're controlling the games, and it just feels like they're sort of hanging on and getting through it and keeping it at 1-0. Again, ultimately, you need a lot of this to succeed, but it's not even like Arsenal earlier in the day, who lots of people were questioning whether Spurs deserved to win, and because they dominated the ball and had more sorry, they dominated the ball and had more of the opportunities, but they didn't once look like they were going to score. Arsenal, knowing that they didn't have Declan Rice and Martin Odegaard in midfield, knew that they had to sit back, knew that they had to operate a little bit differently. Mikel Arteta devised a plan to do that successfully, nullified Spurs in pretty much every way, and won the game. That, for me, is deserving of victory. That's why Arsenal deserved to win, and it was a choice and a way of playing and executing a specific plan. Newcastle aren't doing that, and that's what's worrying me. Jay says in Eddie's press conference a few weeks back, he said that they changed their approach after Wolves last season. He said, you might not have noticed, but we did, in regards to the intensity of our identity. Yeah, so if you remember that point, as I say, one last time before we're going to wrap up in 10 minutes, but please do, if you haven't liked the stream already, please do give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. But there was a point last season because they won in January at Villa, playing in that exact same way. They nullified Villa. They put a plan together. Villa dominated the ball. Newcastle sat deep in the midfield, and it was Miley, Longstaff, and Bruno, who'd all up until then they were trying to play this sort of open, intensity-based way of playing that just didn't suit them. That was the first time where they sat deep and absorbed the pressure and really found their way in that sense from then. And then they went back to type and started getting it was like, why can't they? That was, I think, ultimately that's why they did play that way against Wolves, because they went and lost a few games between that win at Villa and then the win at Wolves at home to Wolves in the March. They reverted to type, as Jay's rightly pointed out, changed their system, changed their approach, and it worked. And then there seems to have been this sort of like slight change, and I think it's right that, because obviously bringing Tonali in, different operation of midfield, different makeups, different opportunities, you want a team that can play in two different ways. But my point is, then they're neither looking like they're trying to control the game and dominate it, or looking like they want to suffocate teams with the high press. They're doing neither of those. They're hanging on and relying on little bits of inspiration, and ultimately that can't last. What we are lacking a bit, says Ian, is with a slow tempo in its retention. It seems the system is set up for Tonali. That's exactly what I was thinking. I think that's a really, really fair point, because this team needs to, if you're going to play like Newcastle are and slowing the game down, not finding their optimum intensity level, as we've said, you need to be really good at keeping the ball. And today in that first half, I think that was the ultimate downfall, is they weren't, and Longstaff lost the ball. Bruno was out of position. There was no recovery pace in defence. All the issues that Newcastle fans have noticed and wanted replacing, wanted changing, and wanted to see different, were on show. And I think that's a really good point that Ian's made. It feels like it's ready for Tonali. And Eddie Howe's had an issue. I've had an issue with Eddie Howe in the last couple of weeks, where a couple of months or even this year, where he's said one or two things, and it's not matched up. I remember last season he kept talking about the identity of the team being in the players, so they weren't as physically. I think he was asked a question about the mentality and the sort of physicality and the aggression in the team and the shithousery, if you like, that they had 2 years ago that they were lacking. And his point was valid, which is that Joe Linton wasn't there, so therefore, specifically Joe Linton, but the team didn't have the same makeup, and the players are really what forces the identity. But my issue with that at the time was he kept trying to make them play in this sort of same attacking way, whereas it's kind of the same issue. I thought that team today and the game with what Wolves were trying to do, it was perfect for Tonali. You needed two midfielders in that midfield makeup would have been perfect because you had a physical destroyer in Jolinton, and then two really good technicians on the ball. One particularly good with flair and moving the ball and dribbling. One particularly at playing it forward quickly and getting around the pitch energetically. That was the perfect makeup because you would have had control of the midfield. You wouldn't have allowed Wolves an ability to set the traps. The ball wouldn't have been there so easily to win. But because Longstaff was there, the ball slowed down and it isn't Longstaff's fault, it's just not his game. And then it isn't a surprise that he was the one who lost the ball for the goal. And I agree with what Ian said. It feels like the whole system was set up for Tonali, and that was what was missing. So yeah, I agree with that. I'm going to start to think about wrapping this up in the next couple of minutes, but do drop some thoughts into the chat if you do have any more, and also like, share, and subscribe, and please do get in touch with some thoughts for the membership scheme as well. Ian's come back and said Tonali can be our Rodri. There's a lot of questions as to what Tonali was going to be. If you remember when Tonali joined, I think everyone had their heart set on Newcastle signing a number 6 to release Bruno, and actually what they got in Tonali was an ability to replicate what Bruno can do. So I think between the two of them, there's an opportunity to be really fluid, and I think that can be really good for Newcastle. Sean had to lose his place to be dropped. Yeah, Eddie is loyal, and Longstaff has been training all break. I'd expect Sandro to be in there from now. I think there has got to be a point where he comes in. But having said that, we thought that Longstaff was going to be out of the team last season, even before his ban. Tonali was struggling. Longstaff came in and the team knitted together a little bit better. So there is obviously a real trust between the two of them. The two of them being Longstaff and Eddie Howe. Eddie says thanks. Always like an instant reaction. So basically, if you're still here, anyone's still here, the way it's going to work this season is either straight after the game, like today, if I'm at home and on a day off, or the day after the game. So next week, I think I'm away on Saturday, so there won't be an instant reaction, but there will be a live reaction where we'll talk through the game on the Sunday against Fulham. There'll be a live reaction to the Wimbledon game and possibly the whatever games are coming up as well. If I'm still here, there'll be an instant reaction to every game, either straight away like today, or 24 hours, or within 24 hours after the game. So please do subscribe if you haven't already to that, and I'd really appreciate if you did that. Craig says, saw both sides of Share today, sleep for the goal, lets his man drop off him, then great distribution for the goal. Not convinced we should go for Gahey again. It's not whether it's Gahey for me, it's just whether it's somebody who's got a bit of pace, because I saw again, there was no ability. Byrne was trying to catch the winger, couldn't do it, and the team was on the back foot as soon as they lost the ball. And part of that is because they have no ability to recover. I hate the stuff Sean puts up with. Yeah, I've said this before, Ian. He doesn't deserve what he gets, and having spoken to Sean Longstaff many times at different points in the last couple of years, I remember being there before the cup final for a round table with a bunch of the other journalists, and he was in almost in tears talking about not about anything that the fans had said or anything, just about how difficult his time with Steve Bruce was and his mental health struggles, and how people like Matt Ritchie had helped him through it. The vulnerability that that guy has shown, and the just how lovely he is, generally how nice he is. And I know the sort of nice guy thing was a frustrating thing when people used to say about Steve Bruce, but and it isn't a barometer as to how good of a footballer he is or how much legitimate criticism he deserves when he plays. But I do think that it really reflects what he deserves, what he gets in terms of stick, like Ian said, and he doesn't deserve anything that he gets. Yeah, I think that, as Craig just said, Gahey is not sure he's that guy. He's not playing well at the moment, is he? Let's be honest. Let's be brutally honest. He didn't have he had another difficult game yesterday against, was it Leicester, and he's had a difficult game against Brentford as well. He's not. I think he's struggling a little bit. For me, it depends on the price. I think he is a very good defender. I think it's ideal that he can play on both sides, despite being right-footed. I think there's so much more, but 70 million, you're not going to get. You shouldn't be offering that amount of money for him. Yeah. So thinking about wrapping up in the next couple of minutes, let me know any final thoughts on the game. Any final thoughts on, has this result changed anything about where you see Newcastle? I think what it does in terms of going forward, where they'll finish and anything like that, I don't think there's that much to be said about it for me. But in terms of what it does show is that they're not the real positive is that they don't give up, and they're not a soft touch. They can hold themselves in games even when they're not playing well. And I think it's easier to find a good performance when you're winning games poorly than it is to find a good performance to find a good result, when you're playing well and not winning games and making the same mistakes. Newcastle are sort of they're coasting through games. The same mistakes are being made, but they're not dropping out anywhere. Champions League, says Elliot. I hope so. That'd be great. Wait till we get going. Good times ahead. I think that's the point. That's what you should take away from this. There has been a really good sense of there is a really good point to this, that Newcastle can stay in games and win, and that it feels like they're waiting for things to click. Hopefully, Isak isn't too badly injured, and they can go and they can give Man City a good game. Because the other thing is as well. So I'll just read a comment from Jay. Yeah, so I will get to Jay's point in a second about the tables and things. I'll get to that point in a second. But yeah, I think Man City being at home and being the next home game is a good opportunity, because the pressure isn't really on the result maybe so much there. You can, like happened 2 years ago when they drew 3-3, and actually last season when they lost 3-2 in the last minute. They've been able to give Man City a good game because they can play their own game with a little bit less pressure. And I remember last season watching them against Man City and thinking that they're still a really good side, and I think they can do that again. Yeah, to Jay's point about bring up browser window and looking at various different stats and stuff. I am looking at getting a StreamYard account and things, which will, if you're not aware of what StreamYard is, basically it basically allows you to do stuff like that and fiddle around with the screen and putting some sort of animations on and that sort of thing. So that is something that I will look at in the next few weeks, once I've sort of set up this whole membership thing and all that sort of thing. So that is definitely on the list, and I really appreciate the feedback. But if you do have any more feedback about how these things work, I'm just using YouTube. Literally, it's just if you go live on YouTube, it just gives you this screen where you just talk, and basically your chat's coming up on the corner of my screen, which is why my face is my face is looking this way, because the screen's here and the camera's over there. So that's why I'm looking down here. But that's why it's a little bit disjointed in that sense, in terms of it's just me talking, basically, because I wasn't really sure I wanted to do these lives up until a few weeks ago. Um, I don't know. I don't know what Ian's talking about in terms of that. Maybe it's something on I don't know, but yeah. So there are lots of things that I'm trying to incorporate, and I've sort of done this a little bit. It's probably something in the background. I don't know what it is. My wife redid this whole thing a few days ago while I was still in Paris. Um, so that I am thinking about how to do these long term and get a lot more things into it. But I sort of just decided one day to start a live, and I'm starting to gain a little bit of an audience for these things. So just to sort of test it out, and the guy, like yourselves and Ian and those guys who are turning up every week, if you have any suggestions, I will listen to them, because it'll make you guys it'll make the experience better for you guys. But I think I am gonna end the stream there. So thank you so much to everyone for joining me on this latest one. Um, it's an easel. That's what it is. Yes, it's. I don't. Yeah, it might be over there somewhere. Um, thanks so much, guys, for joining me on this latest live stream. There will be a video possibly in the week to sort of maybe talk a little bit about one factor, maybe on Monday, one strand of the seasons of the game, and then I'll be back to preview the game at Fulham with a pre-recorded video, and I will be back to record a live stream next Sunday morning, possibly, or lunchtime, looking back at the Fulham game. So thanks so much to everyone who's joined me. Like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate it all. Thanks so much, guys, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.